Good morning. So let us continue our the three models to define the abnormality. So yesterday we have seen there are three models which define the abnormality or abnormal behavior. Three deviations basically. So there is deviation from the social norms, deviation from the adequate functioning or normal functioning, and thirdly there is deviation from the ideal mental health. So let us look at the third aspect today. Three deviations. We have already seen two of them, the deviation from the social norms, deviation from the normal functioning, and deviation from the ideal mental health. So we have already seen these two criteria to define the abnormal behavior. Now let us focus on this ideal mental health. We have also yesterday spoke about a person called Jehoda who was proposed a 6 criteria to define normality and abnormality both. So they are all. So we shall see each of them briefly today. Ideal mental health criteria proposed by Jehoda. The first one is accurate view of the self. Accurate view of the self. To have accurate view of the self, to know one's strengths, one's weaknesses, one's desires, one's aspirations, one's expectations, everything concerning the self, and to have an accurate view of the self. In other words, to have an accurate positive view of the self. If the person is having accurate view of the self, or everything concerning the self, a realistic view of the self, that is another word we can use for this, having a realistic view of the self. Knowing oneself as one is, that is the realistic view of the self. This word is very important. Accurate view of the self or the realistic view of the self. And we can also call it as a positive view of the self. Even though a person has got some limitations, some areas where the person needs to grow, but still by and large a person will have a positive view of the self. Anyone who is having this accurate view of the self or the realistic view of the self or the positive view of the self, that person can be categorized as a person with a normal behavior or a normal person. If the person is deviating from this, if you are having a pessimistic view or a distorted view of the self, then that person can be categorized as a person with abnormal behavior. The distorted, that is the word we used yesterday, distortion. Where there is distortion, there is every likelihood that there may be a possibility of manifesting abnormal behavior. So, if you are having accurate view of the self, a realistic view of the self, and the positive view of the self, the person can be a normal person. That is the first criteria. The second one. The second criteria is actualization. Actualization. It is one of the important criteria, actualization. And yesterday we spoke about Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow, a great psychologist, he speaks about the hierarchy of human needs. So he speaks about this pyramid, hierarchy of human needs. So here he speaks about the physiological needs. That are the basic needs, physiological needs. Then we have safety needs. Then we have love needs. Needs to be loved. Love needs. Then we have esteem needs. Then we have actualization needs. Actualization needs. So these are the needs, hierarchy of the needs. So human person starts with the physiological needs. Food, shelter, clothing. Then we have safety needs. Everyone looks for safety and every person looks for security in life. So these two needs can be termed as basic needs. Basic needs. Once the person meets these basic needs, then the person slowly moves to the next level. That is love needs. Need to be loved. Need to be understood. Need to be cared for. The relationships begins. These love needs, or we can also call them as belonging needs. Belonging. There is a sense of belonging. The person will have a sense of the self and the person will have sense of belonging. There is a sense of self, sense of who I am as a person, and then there is a sense of belonging. I belong to a particular community. I belong to a particular family. I belong to a particular society. So that belongingness comes. So this need becomes, or these needs are called as psychological needs. We have psychological needs. So basic needs are met, then slowly the person makes or goes up, and then he looks for love needs, the belonging needs, and then there comes esteem needs. Esteem need means self-worth, self-esteem. That I am someone. I am as a person is capable of loving, capable of giving. I am a loving person and I am a lovable person. So relationships comes in. So I become a relational creature. So we have this love needs, belonging needs, and then there comes esteem needs. And these two needs are called as psychological needs. So once the person satisfies the psychological needs, he will move up the ladder. And then he looks for actualization needs. That is the highest need according to the Abraham Maslow. Actualization needs. That is becoming the best person that I can be. Becoming the best person that one possibly can be. Actualization means becoming the best that I can be. Become the best person that I can be. That I can possibly be. Possibly be. Become the best that you can be. In order to become the best person that you can be, or that you want to be, or that you are called to be, you need to make use of all your potentials, all your talents, all your energies, all your strengths, all your possibilities and all the given opportunities. So make the best use of all the possibilities, make the maximum use of all the opportunities. Make the best use of all the possibilities, the maximum use of all the opportunities. Then you will be able to realize yourself. You will be able to actualize yourself. Actualization, in other words, realization, self-realization. Self-actualization or self-realization. I actualize myself and I realize myself when I make the best use of all the opportunities and the maximum use of all the possibilities. That is the highest need according to Abraham Maslow of the human person. But Christianity goes little further and they speak about self-transcendence, even higher than this. That is the highest need for Christianity. Self-transcendence. Transcendence. So Abraham Maslow stops here. In the secular world, self-actualization is the highest need. When I realize myself, when I actualize myself by making use of all the available possibilities and making maximum use of all the potentialities and the opportunities, I realize myself. I actualize myself. That is for the secular world. But Christianity goes a little further and they speak about self-transcendence. I go beyond myself towards the Lord, towards the other human beings. So that is for Christianity. But we stop here because we are into this subject. So let us focus on these actualization needs. So according to Jagoda, a person who is able to actualize himself, the person who is able to realize himself is a normal person. If you are able to actualize yourself, if you are able to realize yourself, your potentialities, your opportunities, then you will be a normal person. That is the second criteria according to Jagoda. To understand this second criteria, we have used a theory proposed by Abraham Maslow. It is called hierarchy of needs. Hierarchy means going step by step. From the lower, you are moving towards the higher. From the higher, you are moving towards the highest. So the lower needs are the basic needs. The physiological needs and the safety needs. They are the basic needs of any human person. From there, the person moves towards higher needs called psychological needs. There we have love needs or belonging needs. Then we have esteem needs. From there, the person moves to the highest need called actualization needs. Self-actualization or self-realization. If you are able to realize yourself, if you are able to actualize yourself, then you will be considered as a normal person according to Jagoda. That is the second criteria used by Jagoda, actualization. Now we shall see the third criteria used by Jagoda, that is autonomy. That is the third criteria for normality, autonomy. Autonomy means a sense of independence. A sense of independence. A sense of independence. I can do on my own without the help of the other. Autonomy. One must show independent behaviors. Showing independent behavior without much relying on the others. Sense of independence or showing independent behavior. Showing independent behaviors without relying too much on others. We need some kind of reliance. We rely on each other as human beings. But autonomy means a sense of independence showing independent behavior without too much of reliance on the other. Without too much of reliance, without too much relying on others. So that is autonomy. I can do on my own. Otherwise, you will become too dependent person. All the time you depend on the others for your survival. Then you cannot be a normal person. Too dependent people they exhibit some kind of abnormality. They depend on anything and everything on others. And they become like indecisive people. They cannot make even a simple decision for themselves. They are too dependent on others, too much relying on others. And they don't have this sense of independence. They don't have this sense of autonomy. And they don't have these independent behaviors. Too much reliance of others on others. Or excessively relying on others is a sign of abnormality. That's why Jagoda presents this as one of the criteria of ideal mental health, autonomy. We all need to have certain autonomy, independence. But the ideal would be still interdependence for human beings. Interdependence. It comes in the middle. Neither dependent nor independent. Neither dependent nor independent, but we are interdependent. So interdependence is the sign of maturity. So autonomy can be positively understood in the sense of interdependence. Not too much of independence, not too much of dependence, but striking the middle ground. Interdependence. I need you as much as you need me. We need each other. Otherwise, we go to the extremes of being an individualist or being a loner. A lonely person will be completely depending on the other, or he will be completely excluding himself from the other. So he might be or she might be exhibiting some abnormal behavior. Whereas a healthy person, a person with ideal mental health, a person with a positive mental health, he will be having this interdependence, sufficiently depending on the other and sufficiently remaining independent, striking the middle ground. Neither independence, neither too much of independence nor too much of dependence, but being interdependent. So we can understand autonomy in the sense of interdependence. That is the third criteria proposed by Jagoda for normality or ideal mental health. And the fourth criteria is having the accurate view of the reality. Having accurate view of the reality. Accurate view of the reality. Accurate view of the reality means one must not have a distorted view of how the society operates. So here the society comes in, the reality in the sense of society. So we need to have a realistic view of the society, realistic view of the community, realistic view of the people around. The first criteria is having an accurate view of the self, or positive view of the self, or the realistic view of the self. Whereas here the fourth criteria speaks about the accurate view of the self. That means having a realistic view of the self, realistic view of the society, realistic view of the society, people around. Or the community. So if you are having a realistic view of the self, accurate view of the self, or the positive view of the self, naturally you will be a person who will be having an accurate view of the reality outside. You will be having the accurate view of a realistic view of the society, a realistic view of the community, realistic view of the people around. The opposite of having a realistic view of the self or the society is having an irrealistic view. Irrealistic or unrealistic. If you are having unrealistic view of the society or the community or the people around, then I may be a person with some abnormal behavior, according to Jehovah. So we are called, or we are expected to have this realistic view. That is the meaning of this accurate view of the reality. Perceiving the reality as it is. If I don't have this proper perception, then I may have a faulty perception. Faulty perception of the reality. This accurate view means the realistic perception. The opposite of accurate view of the reality or the unrealistic view of the reality means it is faulty perception. Faulty perception of the reality. I don't have a proper understanding of the people around. So by faulty perception we mean not having a clear understanding of the people around, not having a clear understanding of the community, not having a clear understanding of the society. That is a faulty perception. It's an unrealistic view of the reality. If you are having this accurate view of the reality, that person will be considered as a normal person or person with a normal behavior. When you are having this faulty perception or irrealistic perception or unrealistic perception, that person may be regarded as person with abnormal behavior. In other words, we can say it is a distorted view of the reality. That is the word we have been using since yesterday, no? Distortion, deviation and distortion. Distorted view of the reality. Distorted view means irrealistic, unrealistic and faulty perception. That becomes distorted view of the reality. So all those who are having this accurate perception of the society, of the community, of the people around, they can be regarded as persons with a normal behavior. And those who do not meet this criteria according to Jehovah, they may be considered as people with abnormal behavior. Now let us look into the fifth criteria of Jehovah. That is ability to cope with stress. Another important quality, ability to cope with stress. The fifth criteria is ability to cope with the stress. Ability to cope with the stress. In other words, resistance to stress. Resistance I am able to resist the stressful situation. I am able to resist the stressful people. I am able to resist the stressful situations. If I have this capacity, if I have this ability, then I will be regarded as a person with normal behavior. Resistance to stress. Ability to cope up with the stress, or to cope with the stress, or resistance to stress. Because stress is part and parcel of human life. All of us, at some point or the other, we will be encountering stressful situations, stressful people, and stressful realities or circumstances. And we need to have that ability and the capacity to resist stress or to cope with the stress. If you are not able to cope with the stress, then we experience distress. That is the unpleasant feeling of the person. The person may be feeling unpleasant within, and naturally he or she will make others also to feel uncomfortable or unpleasant. So resistance to stress means ability to cope with the stressful people, stressful situations, stressful realities. Any reality that puts the person in distress. Distress. So if you are able to cope up with the stress, or if you have the ability or the capacity to deal with the stress in an appropriate manner, then we are regarded as normal people, or people with ideal mental health, according to Jagoda. A disturbed person or deviant person or an abnormal person will have tough time to deal with stress. The people, those who are suffering the depression, major depression, they are the people who are not able to cope up with the anxiety, nervousness, tensions and hypertensions, because of the stressful factors that they might encounter in life, and they have this major depression. If you are a normal person, it will be easy for you to handle stress. It may bring some kind of discomfort, but you know how to handle the situation and you move on. Life continues. You will not be blocked, or you will not get stuck up in that situation. You will move ahead. You will find realistic solutions to the situation and realistic ways of getting out of the stressful situation if you are a normal person. So that is the fifth criteria proposed by Jagoda, ability to cope with the stress. So any person who is able to handle the stress properly, appropriately, then that person can be considered as a person with a normal behavior. If you don't meet this criteria, then you will be regarded as a person with abnormal behavior. This brings us to the last criteria of Jagoda, that is adaptability to one's environment. Adaptability. Adaptability to one's environment. Adaptability to one's environment, or in other words, environmental adaptability. Environmental adaptability. Adaptability, in other words, is flexibility. flexibility. The person is flexible enough to adapt to any situation, any circumstance, any realities, to any environment. You'll be a flexible person. So flexibility is a sign of maturity. Flexibility is a sign of maturity. The opposite of flexibility would be rigidity. So if you are a flexible person, you will be a normal person. Usually the abnormal people, they are more rigid people, because they are not able to adapt themselves to the given environment, to the given situation, to the given context. So this comes in, it's important criteria for a normal mental health or ideal mental health proposed by Zagoda. Adaptability to one's environment, to be more flexible person, to adapt to any situation and any people or to any circumstance. If you are not able to handle the situation at hand or the given environment, then that person may become maladaptive. Adaptability, the opposite of adaptability is maladaptive. If you are a maladaptive person, then you are a person with abnormal behavior. This maladaptive means the person is having some kind of deviations. So deviations, distortions. Deviations and distortions. The person deviate from the established norm, or there is kind of distortions, means distraction of the reality. Instead of adapting oneself to the situation, the person may exhibit maladaptive behavior, not fitting to the situation, not fitting to the environment, not fitting to the context. So these are the 6 criteria proposed by Zagoda. So we have accurate view of the self, an accurate view of the reality, a positive view of the reality, then actualization, autonomy, 4th one is accurate view of the reality, then 5th one, ability to cope with the stress or resistance to stress. Then 6th criteria is adaptability to one's environment or environmental adaptability. And this model also has got some limitations, like the other earlier models have got some limitations. This model proposed by Zagoda too has some limitations. The first limitation is regarding the actualization. So the Zagoda says that the person needs to actualize himself or herself. But most of the population may not be able to attain actualization, may not be able to make use of all the available possibilities and the opportunities. So it is not possible, and we cannot consider them as abnormal people just because they do not actualize themselves. So that is one limitation. Most of the population, because of their backgrounds, because of the environment, because of the circumstances that they come from, are people those who are economically weak. We cannot expect all those people to actualize themselves. May not be possible because their options or opportunities or possibilities are very much limited. Since they do not have this actualization, we cannot consider them as abnormal. So that is one limitation. Second one is this accurate view of the reality, perception of the accurate view of the reality. As we know, the reality is a concept of the mind, and everyone will perceive reality in a different way. So this criteria also may have some limitations. So there is no one way to look at the reality. There are different ways of looking at the reality. So that criteria also has got some limitation. Reality is the concept of the mind, and we, the human beings, being unique, we perceive reality differently. So different people perceive the same reality differently. So there is no one way of perceiving the reality. So that brings us a kind of limitation to this model. The third limitation is autonomy. So there are many cultures, collectivistic cultures are there. So they don't encourage this autonomy. They always speak about collectivism or the communitarian dimensions. So whereas this criteria speaks about being independent, having a sense of autonomy, sense of exhibiting independent behaviors. Whereas there are some cultures, that they are called collectivistic cultures, they don't agree with this autonomy. So, and we cannot regard them as abnormal people just because they do not have autonomy. So mainly these 3 points, one to do with the actualization, the second one is the accurate view of the reality, and autonomy. So these 2 criteria have got some limitations. But by and large this model is accepted, except for these small limitations. This criteria proposed by Jagoda gives us some understanding about how to distinguish a person as a normal person or person with some abnormal behavior. So we have seen now 3 models to define this abnormality. The first one is a deviation from the social norm. Second model is deviation from the normal functioning or adequate functioning. And the third model is deviation from the ideal mental health. And here we have seen the 6 criteria proposed by Jagoda. Even though it has got some limitations, by and large this model is accepted. So each of this model contribute for us to understand abnormal behavior, to have some idea about abnormal behavior, or to define abnormal behavior. And this brings us to the another important aspect, that is DSM. What is this DSM? Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So if you want to have a clear definition of abnormal behavior, then we should know about DSM. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So D, S and M, mainly because of this DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is like a manual. Manual means big book which contains all the sicknesses, all the mental sicknesses, mental disorders. So all the psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, they always refer to this particular manual to understand the sickness. This will prescribe all the classification of the sickness, the diagnosis, prognosis, the treatment, prevention, everything will be clearly mentioned in this particular manual. And there is also another book which is used by the psychology, that is called ICD, International Classification of Diseases, ICD. So these two manuals are important. We will be referring more to DSM, and ICD also is important one. International Classification of Diseases. International Classification of Diseases, ICD. This is proposed by WHO, World Health Organization. You all are familiar with that, no? WHO, World Health Organization. Coming to the DSM, it is the classification of mental disorders. Classification of mental disorders using a common language and a standard criteria. So that's the purpose of DSM. Classification of mental disorders. And they use a common language and a standard criteria. So it is universally accepted by all the psychologists all over the world. So if anyone want to diagnose or to classify or to find the treatment, they consult this manual called DSM-5, which means Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And there is also another manual which is also used, which is proposed by WHO, that is ICD, International Classification of Diseases.